Hi everybody, I'm Mike Irvin and I'm your host today. We're coming to you from the Kokanee Creek Provincial Park, and I just want to give a big thank you to BC Parks and to Kokanee Creek Nature Center for having us here today. We acknowledge that the land in which we gather on is the unceded territory of the Sinixt Lakes people. We acknowledge the First Nations people who are connected to this community and this land in modern times. We acknowledge and appreciate the unique and beautiful contributions of First Nation people to our community and our city. The neat thing about a Live It production is that you get to ask your questions live. So what you do, you go on Twitter, you send it to us over the hashtag LiveItEarth, and we have lots of amazing experts online to help answer your questions. So, you know, we're here today to talk about salmon, but I can't just talk about salmon by myself. So I wonder if there is a salmon expert somewhere around here. Oh, hey! Salmon Arm!
I am Joanne Sidarius. I'm the senior naturalist here at Kokanee Creek Nature Center, which is in Kokanee Creek Provincial Park. You needed an expert? Here I am.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to pull up a tree?
Best tree around.
Okay. So can you tell us a fun fact about yourself?
Well, I bet you wouldn't know from looking at me, but I could skate backwards really well because I play hockey and people skate really fast, so I had to find out how to skate backwards well. So there. How about you?
That is really challenging, actually. I don't think I could do that.
Well, it took a while and a few bruises, but I can do it.
So for me, I actually went to the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah, and I got to put on a spacesuit and live in a simulated experience as if I was living on Mars for 10 days.
Can't put skates on that though,
No,
can you?
you can't put skates on that, but it's
Still cool. That was pretty cool.
It's definitely fun. So we're talking a little bit about Kokanee salmon today, but maybe before we dig too much into that, could you just tell us a little bit about salmon in general?
Some fun facts about salmon. Did you know that most salmon live in the ocean and then come back to freshwater creeks and streams where they were hatched to spawn? Mm-hmm. And that has a big word. We call that anadromous. You can look that up and see if you can pronounce it. Anadromous. But it means living in freshwater and in salt water. But our Kokanee salmon don't do that. They are freshwater sockeye salmon.
I was doing a little bit of digging, and I found out that salmon are actually a keystone species, correct? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. Take a look around you. See how green everything is here? Yeah. So a keystone species like Kokanee salmon are the fertilizer for a whole ecosystem. So just imagine if you garden and you didn't put fertilizer, which is often fish fertilizer, if you didn't put that on your garden, the whole garden wouldn't do well. Well, it's like that with an ecosystem. The Kokanee salmon are called keystone species because they hold the ecosystem together. So we have trail cameras here, and I have seen not just bears, osprey, eagles, and great blue herons eating the salmon. I have seen ducks eating the eggs, and I've seen red squirrels nibbling on the really soft, yummy, very dead salmon. And not even to mention all the bacteria and things that turn the salmon back into the soil. So a keystone species is a really important species in an ecosystem, and that's what our Kokanee salmon are.
So they really hold everything together.
Everything, everything.
So I was wondering, can salmon actually live in both freshwater and in salt water?
Right. Yeah. So Kokanee salmon spend 3 years of their lives as silvers in Kokanee Lake, and on their 3rd year they come into the spawning channel. It's an amazing transformation. Can you imagine being a silver fish and then all of a sudden stopping eating at 3 years old, absorbing your scales? If you're a male, you get a great big hooked nose and a hump back, and you turn red. And you have this urge to come into the spawning channel because you can smell your way back to the area where you were hatched. And then you come in and you have 10 to 14 days, and that's when you lay your eggs or fertilize them, depending upon whether you're a male or a female. And you have teeth, but you don't eat. So the teeth are for fighting. So these formerly friendly silverfish in Kokanee Lake now are scrapping spawners in the spawning channel. And the female lays her eggs maybe near where she was hatched in the spawning channel. The male joins her. It's external fertilization. So the eggs are laid in the gravel, which is just the right size to keep them from floating out. And the male and the female spawners guard them, and then they run out of energy and they die, and they're either eaten or they float back out into the lake, and their bodies become the building blocks for the whole ecosystem. But the eggs are still here. So you look at the spawning channel, you might not think there's fish here, but they're little eggs in the gravel, and they hatch in February into something called an alevin, which is a tiny, tiny translucent little fish with a yolk sac. It can hide in the gravel away from predators, and then it pops out in March as a little fish that heads out into Kokanee Lake, and for 3 years lives a life as one of the silver kokanee.
Wow, like that's incredible. So a lot of other salmon, do they have that same kind of lifespan?
Yeah, you know, the number of years that they live outside the spawning area differs, and some of them have to travel to their spawning area, but our kokanee live in Kokanee Lake, come right into the mouth of Kokanee Creek, and people have built a spawning channel beside the creek for them, and that's where they come.
So just a reminder, if you have any questions, please hashtag LiveItEarth and send them through to us. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So we actually have some questions coming in right now, so let's take a look. Why are they called Kokanee salmon?
Oh, that is a really great story. So, you know how people like to manage ecosystems? Well, the indigenous people here, the Sinaiaks people, they called them Kokanee, and that means redfish, and that's an incredible name. We still call them the redfish, but over the years, Kokanee evolved into Kokanee, and that's why we call them Kokanee salmon.
What makes kokanee different than other types of salmon?
They're freshwater fish. They never see the ocean, and they haven't for 10,000 years. So I'm sure you all know there used to be glaciers here, and if you looked up at the sky, it would have been, whoa, 40 feet high or more, just solid ice. And then it melted and there was fresh water all over BC. So fish just went back and forth, but then the water evaporated and became little lakes and rivers. And in this area, Bonington Falls was created between Castlegar and Nelson on the Kootenay River, and the fish couldn't get back and forth anymore. It was a 40-foot drop. So for 10,000 years, Kokanee salmon have come to Kokanee Creek and been eaten by bears, eaten by people, and so we're watching something that is very ancient and very special.
Hi, I'm Milo. I'm from Campbell River. I'd like to know what Kokanee salmon eat. Thank you.
Well, Kokanee salmon, when they turn red and become the Kokanee spawners, and they get the big hook nose and the hump back and the teeth, those teeth aren't for eating. The Kokanee salmon aren't eating at all when they're spawners. But when they are the silver Kokanee salmon in the lakes, they're eating all the little tiny plants and animals that float around in the lake, and we call that plankton. And so there's phytoplankton, which is the tiny little plants, and zooplankton, which is the tiny little animals.
Okay, so just to recap, most salmon are, how do you pronounce this?
Anadromous.
Anadromous, which means they live in salty ocean or they live in the fresh water. The second part is there are 5 different types of salmon. We have coho, sockeye, chinook, pink, and chump. And the third recap is salmon are a keystone species. They're integral to the environment and all the other species around them. Joanne, you mentioned that the Kokanee salmon have been trapped for over 10,000 years because there was a glacier that melted, right?
Yeah, it's an amazing story. So just picture that for 10,000 years, Kokanee salmon, which were sockeye salmon that went to the ocean and came back, eventually became trapped in a freshwater lake, Kokanee Lake, and they survived. And they've adapted to that life, and they have continued doing that and coming into Kokanee Creek and have been the source of nutrients for this whole area for that whole time. So if you looked in the trees, you would find Kokanee salmon proteins, and will have for generations and generations.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, so they are the same species. Kokanee salmon are sockeye. salmon. They're the same species. They will have some genetic differences because the sockeye salmon goes to the ocean, comes back to the area where they were hatched, to a spawning ground. Kokanee salmon, they're in Kootenay Lake for 3 years. They just have a hop, skip, and a jump, well, literally, into the Kokanee Creek and then up the spawning channel. So they really don't have to travel far. When they come in the spawning channel, that's where they are laying their eggs. So we're not seeing a traveling group of fish. We're seeing fish that are actually laying their eggs paired up. Oh, I forgot to mention it before. But you know, there are genetic differences in the Kokanee salmon that live in this area. So we have the stream spawners. So those are the fish that move into the spawning channel here, Kokanee Creek, and live and spawn inside the creek in the gravel. But there is another type of Kokanee salmon that spawns on the actual shores of Kootenay Lake. And they spawn a little bit later. They need the upwelling water on the shores of the lake.
The upwelling water?
Yeah, it's colder. So along the creek, there's water. There's underwater. We're actually on a creek delta. There's underwater creeks running through here, and so on Kootenay Lake, there are places where the water comes up, and it's cold because it's coming up from the ground, and sockeye salmon, our kokanee, need cold water. I didn't mention that, but if temperatures get above 14 degrees Celsius in the creeks or the water, it stresses them. It stresses them a great deal, and some of them will start dying.
All right, so we actually have some questions that are just coming in right now, so let's go straight to those. What do kokanee look like compared to sockeye?
Well, they are pretty similar, really. So they both stop eating, turn red when they spawn. Males get a humped back and a hooked nose and develop teeth. Females stay fairly svelte, but they do get teeth as well. And but they're smaller. So those are some of the differences. But they look the same, and our kokanee salmon are smaller. But that doesn't make them any less interesting, does it?
Well, and then another question we have coming in is, how large of an area is their migration, and where are they found?
So the kokanee salmon here don't have a large migration because they come in from Kootenay Lake, which is right at the mouth of Kokanee Creek, and they're coming into Kokanee Creek, diverted, and then they're diverted into the spawning channel. So their migration is maybe 300 meters. It's not a great migration, but once they're in the spawning channel, they are jockeying around to find a good spot to spawn.
So we actually have another final question right now. Are kokanee named after the Kokanee Glacier?
Ah, the Kokanee Glacier is named after the fish.
Really?
And the Kokanee Glacier drains into Kokanee Lake, which comes down into Kokanee Creek and then into Kootenay Lake. And it's a glacial creek, so it doesn't have a lot of nutrients. Again, that's why all of the dead fish adding all the nutrients into this area is important, because glacial creeks are wonderful for drinking and they're clear. They don't have a lot of nutrients.
So some of the takeaways we have for this section: kokanee salmon have become landlocked and have been landlocked for over 10,000 years. Kokanee and sockeye are the only salmon that transform before they spawn. So we pulled up a tree, we've had a really good conversation so far, but you know what I'd really love is if we could go down to the water. Is that possible?
Oh, would you like to do some exploring?
Yes.
Let's keep our distancing still,
Okay.
but follow me.
Sounds good.
All right.
Wow. Where did you take us to? This is beautiful.
This is one of my favorite places on earth. This is where Kootenay Lake is over there, and Kokanee Creek comes out and into the lake, and this is the entrance to the spawning channel, and we can see the fish here. But so many animals use this place. We have a beaver lodge right over there, or the beavers come and repair their lodge. There are otters living in it right now because they want to eat the kokanee salmon. There's a skunk trying to take over another part of the lodge. It's kind of like a Peyton place. But then there's great blue herons that feed over on the flat over there. All kinds of mallard ducks and mergansers that come and eat the eggs and the fish. And gulls that'll eat anything because they're gulls.
It's a buffet.
It's a big buffet. Ah, there goes a mallard right now,
Oh, wow.
coming in for a landing. There was a vulture, a black vulture circling around because the fish are starting to die off and smell now.
That's true. I remember seeing a few of them up in the trees as we were walking down.
And ravens, you can hear the ravens. Yeah, if you spent a whole day here, you'd certainly come back feeling very rested and knowing a lot more about the animals that live here.
Well, you mentioned earlier about the challenges and impacts that the kokanee are facing. How are they doing?
You know, they're survivors.
Yeah?
They've been here for 10,000 years. They managed to make the transition from being an anadromous fish. That's always difficult for me to say. A fish that lives in saltwater and freshwater to becoming freshwater sockeye. And then we put dams in. We put the Duncan Dam at the top, at the north end of Kokanee Lake, and the Libby Dam down at the south end. Dams restrict the flow of nutrients into a system. And so the kokanee salmon grew a little bit smaller, as did the other fish that rely on them. So the dams had an effect. Also logging, when you remove forest from a slope near a creek, it warms up, and these are salmon that rely on cold water. As I said before, you have 14 degrees Celsius before the fish are really stressed out. And you know, I bet you know the biggest challenge is climate change. It's a challenge for all of us. And as I said, these fish are cold water fish. If the temperatures keep going up on the creeks, we may have fewer kokanee salmon in the future.
Well, I know that there are some things that you've also done in the park here that you're trying to help.
Oh yes, the big one, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the 80s they built a spawning channel. So they put in the perfect size Goldilocks gravel so the female can flip on her side, move her tail and move the gravel.
Create a little pocket.
Yeah, because look at this. This is the gravel, the rocks that are left in the creek bed, and a fish cannot move that with her tail. So they replaced the gravel. The highway came in and there was blasting. So the spawning channel is really important. It's the water that from Kokanee Creek that makes it flow. It's maintained over winter. It's 80% more fingerlings, that's the tiny little fish, remember? That leave in spring from a spawning channel than they do from any of the creeks left around here. More so now, really.
So you've created two different kinds of paths here in a way. So you've got like the main creek here, and you've also created a separate sort of channel which the salmon can climb their way up.
Right. We've fenced off the creek because the success is not as great in the creek as it is in the spawning channel. And just by the way, the indigenous people used to fence things off so they could direct the fish too, but that was for hunting purposes. But people manage wherever they go. They manage for hunting and eating.
So even with all of these odds stacked against them, they still survive.
I know, and it's amazing. Every year when they come back here in August, it's like this promise. A promise that there will be a future, that in 3 years there will still be kokanee salmon coming back. And I think as people, we need to take a look around us and take the promises that are given to us.
Okay, so I'm just gonna take the moment now to actually remind everybody that if you do have any questions, make sure you send them to us at the hashtag #LiveItEarth. And we actually do have some questions that are just coming in right now. Let's go to them.
All right, let's give it a go.
Hi, my name is Radisson from Castlegar, and I'm wondering who eats kokanee salmon?
There are predators in the lake that eat the fish, and there is a rainbow trout that is adapted not to eating insects like a lot of rainbow trout are, but to eating the kokanee. So they've got a wider mouth and their intestines have changed. So they are in the lake and they eat the kokanee.
How long do kokanee salmon live for?
So 3 years.
3 years.
So once they come into the spawning channel and they've turned red and they've got the hump and the teeth and they the female lays her eggs, the male fertilizes and they guard the nest site. It's called a redd, by the way, R-E-D-D, it's a Russian word. So they guard the redd for a little bit and then they die. So they only lived for 3 years. There is a 2-year-old male that comes in and he's called a sneaker or a jack, and he gets between the male and the female spawners and tries to fertilize some eggs. And everybody tries to chase him off, but he dies too. Yeah. Everybody dies.
I actually have a question on this as well. You know, we've talked about some of the challenges, the impacts, and how resilient, and some of the things that we've been trying to do to help them thrive and survive. So, you know, but what is it that we can actually do, like just anyone, to help these salmon species?
Well, you know, we're already doing something. You're already learning about the salmon. So the more you learn about them and the more you care about your world and the salmon that are in it, the more likely it is that you will make decisions that are good for the salmon. And I have another suggestion. I think people should write letters. However they choose to write their letter, whether you want to email or text or whatever you choose, go to the top, go to the Prime Minister and say, I really care about salmon. Can you tell me what we can do about salmon? Write to your MLA, your Legislative Assembly ministers and elected officials. Tell them you care about the salmon that are in British Columbia or in the rest of Canada. Well, I love this place and I love the salmon, and I hope by sharing, well, maybe I can share that love too.
Okay, so to recap, Kokanee and sockeye are the only salmon that transform before they spawn. Kokanee salmon are a keystone species. Kokanee have become landlocked over 10,000 years ago and live in freshwater. Kokanee salmon face many challenges, yet they are a resilient species and continue to survive against all odds. Thank you everybody for joining us for the Kokanee Salmon Show today. We really appreciate all of your online questions. We definitely have a lot of experts that are there. They're going to keep going through them and answering them for you. I want to give a big thank you as well to BC Parks and also to the Kokanee Creek Nature Center. And of course, as well as our expert for the day, Joanne.
And I want to say thank you to you people for being here, helping us spread the word. And come on out and visit the Kokanee Creek Nature Center if you get a chance. We'd love to talk to you.